stories don't define you. How you tell them will.
Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and Chief Storymaker at Elkins Consulting. In my work with coaching clients, I guide people to improve their communication using storytelling as the foundation of our work together. What I've realized over years of coaching and podcasting is that the majority of people don't realize the impact of the stories they share on their internal messages and on the people they're sharing them with. My work with leaders and people who aspire to be leaders follows a similar path to the interviews on my podcast, uncovering pivotal moments in their lives and learning how to share them to connect more authentically with others, to make their presentations and speaking more engaging, to reveal patterns that have kept them stuck or moved them forward, and to improve their relationships at work and at home. When you're ready to get started collecting your own stories, my book, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, is available in all the regular places, and the audiobook version is now available on Google Play and on my website, elkinsconsulting.com. As a special bonus for listeners, the audiobook includes 2 songs recorded by my band, Spare Change, in my living room in Montana. Keep an eye out for announcements through LinkedIn and via my Elkins Consulting Facebook and Instagram pages, or visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, to learn more. Also on my website is a free podcast interview checklist. It's available to download to make sure you make the most of your next podcast interview. I am blessed today to be interviewing a guy named Jason Greer that I met through John White on LinkedIn. And Jason and I have gone back and forth a couple times, kind of by accident because I missed an appointment. It was totally embarrassing. But Jason just recently published a book that he co-wrote with Phil Dixon, and it's called Bias, Racism, and the Brain. And given that over the last 6 months or so, I've been highlighting and amplifying voices that are speaking of reason within the context of humanity and kindness and compassion and personal growth and understanding, he's the perfect guest to have on this podcast. Your stories don't define you, how you tell them will. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sarah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. And I have been since I started reading the book. As soon as I saw it, I thought, okay, that's another one that I need to read. I've been slowly getting through how to be an anti-racist, and slowly because I want to make sure I'm absorbing the stories in a way that I can then apply them and try not to get as angry about them as I get. I'm trying to balance it a little. So I'm reading it a little slowly. But your book, I read the first half like just so fast because it's all stories. And,
yes.
I'm a big believer in learning through stories. And then the second half is really the neuroscience behind bias and racism. And while I find that fascinating, I've been reading about that for a long, long time. And as much as I know about it, I can't really apply what I'm learning in the same way that I can through stories. So welcome again. So the first question I always ask my guests is that I ask them to share something about themselves that most people might not know about you. And I do that because I like for our listeners to have some context before they start hearing your more vulnerable stories.
Right.
And it also addresses the complexity of us as humans. So What do you think? Do you have something to share?
Well, I have a couple things, if you don't mind.
Of course, please.
The first I'll say, and I'm going to go ahead and give my age. I'm 46 years old. And when I was 17 years old, I was a victim of cross burnings by the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And so the KKK targeted my family. My father was the first African-American principal in Dubuque, Iowa history. And he was the principal of a grade school. And my mom, so I'd grown up in St. Louis, Missouri, in a small suburb called Bridgeton, Bridgeton forever, as we tend to say, those of us who came out of Bridgeton. And it was my senior year in high school, and my parents knew that they didn't want to move me at that time because it was my last year in high school. And my mother was a nurse. So my mom and I stayed in St. Louis, and we moved my father up to Dubuque. We didn't know that we were coming to the city under the constructive integration plan, whereby they were bringing over 100 Black families into the city over the course of 10 years in order to diversify the city. The challenge is they never told us. So, it's one of those things, especially as you talk about storytelling, how important it is to actually narrate the story so that other people understand their part in the story if they play a part, right?
Right.
So
I just have to interrupt for 1 second. Yeah. My son just asked me, my son's girlfriend, who is not Jewish, asked me what it's like to be the token Jewish person or the token Black person or the token Asian person or Native American person. And I had to explain what that meant to me. So go on, you were the token Black family at that point.
Yeah, we were. And the problem is that we had no idea. My parents had no idea. Well, let me say this exclusively for my father. He had no idea what he was bringing his family into, let alone what he had stepped into. For my mother and I, we had no idea why, because my father was not sharing some of the details of what was happening to him, really out of protection, what he believed to be protection for my mother and I. But here we are, the windows of our house are being routinely broken out. The N-words being spray painted on our house. And you quickly learn with insurance that you can't keep making the same claim for new siding until they start to think that, okay, you're doing this on yourself and this potential insurance fraud, right?
Right.
And I'm still trying to figure out, okay, why, I dealt with racism in my life, but never to this level. And then it sort of exploded when the Klan, and they created this organization called the National Association for the Advancement of White People. And so and understand this is pre-internet. So this is how we learned that Klan chapters would speak to Klan chapters, because there was an active Klan chapter in and around a suburb of St. Louis. So they targeted our family when they found out where we lived. So here I am with this hate and this venom, being spewed toward my family and being called the N-word so many times that I thought about changing my first name to it just to make things easier for people, right? But I still have the mentality of a 17-year-old whose life basically consisted of sports, friends, school, and girls. So I'm dealing with this, and all the while, Sarah, all I'm thinking is, man, I don't even know who I'm taking to the homecoming dance, let alone trying to figure out why these people hate me, that they've never even met me. And so I guess in sharing something about myself that a lot of people don't know is that I am proof positive that life can hand you a bunch of raw deals, consecutive deals, and you still have the ability to overcome that as long as you're willing to acknowledge the impact that it's had on you.
Yeah, I see that a lot. And that's really where that whole title came from. Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will.
Yes.
It's all of the structure of your internal messages. So
right.
Are you telling it as a victim, or are you telling it as somebody who is resilient, somebody who has dealt with this in a brave way and moved on from it and been able to teach others? And and
even to the point, if you don't mind my interrupting,
course,
what you just said, sometimes it's a slippery slope between being the victim and being the hero, right? Because I've had plenty of moments in my life where I felt heroic. I felt, I have over 10,000 comic books. My father, when he was doing his research on, he's an educational psychologist by training. So when he's doing his doctoral research, he used me as a guinea pig teaching creative writing and the use of creative storytelling on someone's ability to learn how to read. So I was reading by, I think, 3.5, but he used comic books as a medium. So I grew up with that archetype in my mind of, if I want to be strong, then I need to be like Superman. If I want to be strong, I need to be like Batman. If I want to be strong, I need to be like Superman. Mind you, I didn't understand that all of these heroes were white and there was not a single Black hero, right? So here I am in that moment of my life where I'm going through these things and I'm trying to pull on the experiences of heroes that have come before me, even if it's in comic book form. And I can't, because I couldn't imagine Superman ever going through this. I couldn't imagine Spider-Man ever going through this. And that's when victimhood for me set in, because I didn't know who to pull on other than my father. I didn't have a model other than my father, who's always been my hero, right? But I'm watching my father go through this, and I was struggling to find that next level for a long period of my life.
Yeah, I think most people do.
One of the people I interviewed on my podcast a while back said that she was trying on personas
Yes.
when she was 18, 19, 20, because she just wasn't sure what her identity was going to look like as an adult. And so she was trying on different personas until she started to uncover her own real drive and motivation, her why.
I so respect that. In undergrad, I think the persona that I tried to put on was a mixture of my father, as well as Malcolm X, because I think I devoured the autobiography of Malcolm X at least 10 times when I was an undergrad. And it was not in an effort to be, as people generally think of Malcolm X, as being anti-white. It was more, how do you deal with the worst that humanity has to show you and still hold your head up, right?
Mm-hmm. How do you not get stuck in that mud with them?
How do you not get stuck in that mud with you, especially when you have, in my case, whether it was during my undergraduate years or just in my life in general, you have, and you generally see it also in social media, where something negative happens. Let's say in the case of the George Floyd moment, something negative happens. There is a reaction from people who look like George Floyd, which happens to be Black people. And then what generally comes from well-meaning white people is, well, you have to be like MLK. You have to be like Martin Luther King. You have to be, right? You have to be peaceful. You have to be loving. Well, you killed Martin Luther King. Let's just be real. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those things where I got so tired of hearing, you have to be the peacemaker in the face of people who were not being peaceful to me, that I wanted to create this. I had to, in order to survive, create this middle ground that says, I'm not going to fight you with my fist because I don't know how to fight. And the 3 times I tried to fight, it didn't go so well for me. So let's
we're gonna have to rewind on that story sometime soon. But
right. So let's backtrack this. But I can fight you with my spirit, and I can't fight you with my mind. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think, I love that what you said about trying on different personas, because I had to try on multiple personas just to get out of bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's why they have those sayings like, what would Jesus do?
Right.
For people who need that kind of moral compass.
Yes.
They think about it in terms of a model that they respect and admire.
Right.
So, I think a lot about what my mom would do, or what my sister would do, or in certain circumstances, what one of my boys would do, because they are great models for me and my behavior. They changed me, like most kids change their parents. And you just want to be the best version of yourself for your kids. And so every time I would see myself start to sink into the mud with people who were being cruel, I would think about, how would I want my kids to see me behaving right now?
Yes.
Do I want them to see me bad-mouthing this person behind her back because she did that to me? Is that the right model?
Right.
No. Yeah. Wow. As I was reading your book, one of the things that I really wanted to hear was when a white colleague or friend did the right thing. I read all of these things that infuriated me, that your friends and colleagues didn't acknowledge what you were going through. The guy in the restaurant, that when you went to the bathroom and those other guys were staring at you on your way back out, and they had the MAGA hats and stuff like that. And you go back and you sit down and you tell your friend, those guys are staring at me. And he's like, oh, you're overreacting. Just, you can't judge them because you don't know anything about them. You're like, right. And my blood was boiling as I was reading that. Like, I was thinking how I would react to that. And it definitely wasn't that. So, and then the other one where you're sitting with a bunch of white colleagues and everybody's putting their credit cards out, and the waiter only asks for your ID.
Yes.
And you mention it to your colleague, hey, did you notice? I'm the only one that he wanted to check the ID.
Yes.
The colleague says, oh, he probably just forgot to check mine.
Yes.
I'm like, what? Did they really say that? And I know they did, because your stories are all your personal experiences. So what I would love to hear is when they did the right thing, so that we can start modeling that.
I think I'm embarrassed to admit that I can only find one instance in my life in which someone has actually someone who's white has actually stood up for me.
Tell me about that, please.
And I can't believe I didn't include this. I'm embarrassed I didn't include this story in my book. My undergraduate year, so this is 1996. So this is my senior in college at Valparaiso University. And we were so happy that there was this Applebee's that opened up, right? Because, if you could take a girl, right. But, you're a kid. So if you could take a girl out.
Advertisements, right?
Right, exactly. If you could take a girl out to Applebee's and, especially if your mom and dad gave you some money, maybe we can get appetizers too, right?
Ooh.
So I'm at this Applebee's. I'll never forget. I was out at Applebee's. I was there by myself. And I'm waiting for someone to come and see me. So I'm waiting. So probably this went on for maybe about 15 minutes, right? And I had nowhere else to be. So I didn't care. And then a white couple comes in behind me. And all of a sudden, 4 different hostesses come out, right? And they walk past me and immediately walk to this couple. And it happened to be a classmate of mine. And I'm not going to give her name. And she looks at me. We've been great with each other. We've known each other for 4 years. It was clear that they jumped me. She looked at me, looked at her boyfriend, and just had a seat, right? So finally somebody comes up to me and says, "What can we do for you?" And I was like, "I would like to get a menu, have a seat and get a menu." So they put me in the back of the restaurant, whatever. I was sharing this experience with a friend of mine, Hope Brandt, formerly Hope Brandt. And she and I were classmates. And it was maybe 3 days later, I get a call and I get a letter from the general manager of Applebee's apologizing for what happened, as well as a gift card that was big enough for me to take all of my friends to dinner. And when I showed up, because we went the next week, because I thought it was a ruse. When we showed up the next week and I presented the gift card, the general manager came out, and of course he goes, "Look, I don't think we were not trying to be racist, and it was not intentional. I just think it was an oversight. But dinner's on us." And so we're all talking. So it's me, Hope, my friend Will, and I think my friend Yari, maybe. And I'm sitting around, I was like, man, I don't know how they found out about this. And that's when Hope opened up that she was so moved and so hurt by what I experienced that she contacted Applebee's. Mm. And I will forever be indebted to her. But understand that happened to me when I was 21. And I'm 46 now. And that's the only instance where I can actually think of someone who took a stand for me, who happened to be white. I would say that my co-author, Phil Dixon, is taking a stand by, look, this book, our book, Bias, Racism, and the Brain, Phil is known within the leadership space, the brain-based leadership space. So he didn't have to take this on. Phil's attitude of it was, look, I don't know how much of a race problem we have in this country, when I really think that we have a brain problem. But until we start to really boil down into these stories, we're not going to get to a place of understanding. So I'd say it was definitely been Hope when I was 21, and Phil Dixon my entire life. So since I've known him since 2005.
That just, it's not only sad. I mean, it is sad, but to me, it's infuriating in some ways. I guess because I can't imagine not saying something. And maybe it's because of the people that I spend time with. And I actually just interviewed this outstanding human, Desiree Attaway, who does a lot of trainings for people, for companies across the country, actually internationally. Okay. Do you know who she is, Desiree Attaway?
No, I don't, but I'll definitely look her up.
Yeah, she's an amazing human. Well, I asked her that same question. I said, tell me about a time that it worked, that somebody actually did the right thing. And she said that when she, early on in her business partnership with this young white woman, her partner pulled her aside and she said, "One day my whiteness will betray me. What are we going to do so that we can get past it? What are we going to do to address it? Yeah, one day my whiteness will betray me." And the beauty of that to me wasn't just that this person understood that she's going to step in it at some point and she's going to need some help getting back out, and understand that she stepped in it and understand what that meant and why it was insulting. But on top of that, Desiree mentioned that she feels that way sometimes. Someday my hetero mentality will betray me when I'm talking to somebody who is trans or has other gender identity or sexual identity. And so she acknowledged that it's not one-sided, that we all step in it at some point.
Yes, we do.
And the question is, how do we let somebody know, especially if we're not close friends, or at least indicate, what is our cue that we can use when we are with close friends? I often talk to my coaching clients about this when they're working in a team. What's your cue that you can use to let this person know that the language they're speaking is either insulting or overwhelming? What's a cue that you can use that won't hurt the person, that won't make them feel dismissed, but that will acknowledge that this is happening internally and that something's got to shift before you're going to move on and be successful in the conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that in my life, and again, I'll go back to my experience with Phil Dixon. Before you can come up with the cue, you first have to come up with the understanding of why the cue is necessary, right?
Right, absolutely.
And I'll say that as we were writing this book, Bias, Racism, and the Brain, I'd write my story, then I'd send it off to Phil. I'd write another story, send it off to Phil. And I'm really thinking I'm doing something, right? And lo and behold, Phil is reading these stories because Phil and I have been close friends since 2005. So there are a few people on the face of this planet that know me as well as Phil does. Phil and his wonderful wife, Kathy Dixon. Phil would kick the stories back to me and would say, it's not enough, right? What do you mean it's not enough?
We need more detail.
He goes, am I speaking to Jason, the corporate guy, or am I speaking to Jason, the guy who probably has more emotional scars than most people put together, right? But I've kept that in my closet, so to speak. He goes, if we're really going to move this needle, he goes, because I can put out a book about, the neuroscience of bias, but that's going to be just like every other book. He goes, but if we're going to move the needle, we need your stories. But in order to have your stories, we need something that we can pull people into, right? Mm-hmm. So as I started to open up more, and writing this book was cathartic, but writing this book, I think I'm still carrying the heaviness of it, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it because I had to open that closet again to things that I hadn't thought about in years. They were still there, but I hadn't thought about them. So in the process of writing this book, and then Phil and I talking, Phil would ask me questions. Is there ever a point in time in which I made you feel like this? If there's ever a point in time when I made you feel like that? And I could honestly say that there was never a point in time where Phil made me feel like I was anything less than his friend. Mm-hmm. But if we were going to be out, I take that back. Phil and I went to we ended up taking him to the hospital for a procedure. I was with my wife. And I'm African-American. My wife's African-American couple. And Phil is a, 6'2", good-looking 70-year-old British man, right? Mm-hmm. So we take him to the hospital, and they take him away for tests. And then the doctor, because we're in a small town in North Carolina, and probably about 40 miles outside of Durham. And the doctor tried to be cool. And he's like, so, how do you know Mr. Dixon?
What is the relationship here?
What's the relationship here? So me and Tiffany kind of looked at each other because we've known each other since, we met at Valparaiso University together.
Wow.
And we had that look like, okay, do we mess with him by saying we're Phil's kids? Right? Right? Because we were tempted to go there.
Right. The temptation is there.
Right. But we just said lifelong friends with Phil, and we were just worried about him, and we were glad that we could be there for him. But we then go to Duke University, where Phil was being taken for more tests. And we walk into the hospital room, and there are a bunch of doctors around him. and a bunch of doctors around, a bunch of nurses. And we walk in and immediately they look at us like, what are you doing here? And Phil's like, oh, this is my family members. Come on in. Right. I can't tell you what that did for us, because that we hadn't even spoken about what that cue is, other than just see me as a human being. Right. I've unfortunately in my life been surrounded by, I think, so many well-meaning people, but their attitude, unfortunately, has been, if we don't talk about oppression, there can't be oppression. Right. And if I don't see it, does that really mean it's racist? Well, here's part of the challenge is that the way many white people have been cultured has been, if we don't talk about racism, then you can't be accused of being racist. And here's the problem is that you get so comfortable talking about sports. You get so comfortable talking about family, talking about business, talking about politics to some extent, right?
Not lately.
Not lately. But then when the subject of racism comes up, you start to fumble. And again, going back to the example in the book of my former friend who were just out having dinner, hanging out, two married fathers talking about life. And I just happened to have made the mistake of having to go to the bathroom. And darn me, right?
Call to nature.
Exactly. And as I'm walking back to, and we also happen to go to church together. And as I'm walking back to our table, I see a man with a Confederate flag shirt on and another man with a Confederate flag hat on. Well, considering what I've come from, and they're staring at me, if I see that, automatically my brain goes into a threat state, because these are my perceived enemies. Who walks around with Confederate stuff on unless you're trying to make a statement, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I go back to the table and I tell my friend, again, thinking, I wasn't even testing him. I was just like, hey, look, you see the guy back there? He's got a Confederate flag shirt on and the other guy's got a Confederate flag hat on. And before I could say anything, my friend goes, well, Pastor Tim talked about understanding where different people come from and just being open to differences of opinion. And I'm looking at this guy thinking, you're supposed to be my boy. I just share with you that there are two guys with Confederate flags emblems on and on some part of their bodies. And you want to give me a rehash of a sermon from our white pastor, who admittedly has never dealt with any kind of racism. And now you want to just go on and talk about what the football game that's coming on? Right? So
I'm going to interrupt you just for a second.
Absolutely.
What if you had walked out and said that, and he said, damn, what do you want to do? Would that be the right answer? What is the right answer in that case? I mean, if I were sitting with you, I would want to know, what do I say in that situation?
That would have meant everything to me had he just taken a pause for a second and said, damn, what do we do next?
Yeah, do you want to leave?
What do you need from me?
Right.
We can go down the street and have dinner. I can go say something, which I never would have wanted him to say anything. Right. I'm here with you. I'm here for you.
I hear what you're experiencing. I'm right here with you, and I'm sitting beside you and experiencing it with you.
Well, and here's the catch-22 is that on the other side of that, when I finally confronted him with that, and understand, it took me months to really confront him with this.
Of course.
Because I talked to my wife about it. It's awkward, but it's also, look, we go to a predominantly white church, and I don't want us to be known as the couple that cries racism, because that seems to be very offensive to many white people. Right. Well,
but you just said white people have a hard time talking about racism, but you have a hard time talking about racism to a white person that expressed it.
I have a hard time opening up about my oppression and feeling like I have to be the educational tool for you to understand my oppression. Right. There's a difference. I think that, look, I was born in 1974, so there's no such thing as the World Wide Web. Right. So if we didn't learn something from Walter Cronkite, I think his name is Cronkite. Thank you. Or it wasn't in the newspaper, we just didn't know it. Or if it wasn't an encyclopedia, right?
Right.
You don't have that excuse today. because there's so much. If you are curious about something, there is so many resource tools available to you. I don't care if it's websites. I don't care if it's videos. I don't care if it's, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So when I finally opened up to my friend about what happened and how it made me feel, he said to me, he goes, well, why didn't you say something to me in the moment? And I go, why did I have to? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because understand, if we were, again, my friend is white, if we're sitting at a table and a group of African Americans come in with a bunch of, let's say, Black Lives Matter shirts on, or let's kill, insert adjective, right? Or descriptive
Mm-hmm.
word.
Mm-hmm.
My first statement to my friend would be, do you want to go somewhere else?
Yeah.
Because my allegiance is to you as my friend.
Right.
Right? If he says, no, I don't want to go anywhere else, I want to stay here, guess what? My allegiance is still to you. The rest of that's background noise until it becomes an issue for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But
Right.
that's called friendship. And I think part of the struggle with when we talk about racism, and this is infused within in the book Bias, Racism, the Brain, is the part of the reason why we shared these stories, or my stories, was because I want you to my hope is that you start to form some bonds of sympathy that one day might lead to empathy, right?
Mm-hmm. Because
look, I grew up 2-parent household, educated parents. I've been very fortunate in my career because I've done extremely well, and I'm very proud of the things that I've accomplished. But if I'm on the quote unquote higher end of that spectrum, right, from an economic standpoint, these things are still hitting me. These things are still impacting me. I'm still seeing and experiencing these things. So you can't just say it's a matter of education, right? You can't just say it's just a matter of, well, that only happens to certain Black people. It doesn't happen to other Black people. Well, look, I was 17 when I saw my first cross being burned, and I was 18 when I had a man throw a bottle of urine in my mouth, right? And I still had to go back to campus and act like nothing ever happened because I didn't want to offend the white sensibilities of my white classmates. Because again, even in that was survival for me. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't want them to look at me as though I was a charity case, right? I didn't want them to look at me as though I was different than them. So
we've kind of touched on this idea of being an ambassador for our people.
Yes.
And it's a huge responsibility and it's exhausting.
Yes.
And the whole, it shouldn't be this way pops into our heads all the time. I shouldn't always have to be on. And I think about that with every human being, that we are always on and we are always representing our people, whether I'm representing short Jewish white women or mothers or people that were born in Washington, D.C. Like once people hear I was born in Washington, D.C., I represent all people that were born in Washington, D.C. to a person who has never been there, to a person who has never met a Jewish person. As soon as I mention anything about Hanukkah or the braided bread, the challah that I make on Friday nights, I am immediately lumped in with all Jews, which means that the next time they meet a Jewish person, the interaction they had with me is going to color the interaction that they have with the next Jewish person that they meet.
Yes.
Every time. I have the luxury of not telling people, and then they won't know. People of color don't have that choice.
Yes.
People who are trans don't have that choice.
Yes.
They stand out. There's no way that they can have that luxury of fitting in if they want to. Mm-hmm. And I get that. And I think it's part of why I'm so sensitive about making sure people know, because I don't want to take advantage of that luxury.
Right.
So one of the things when you said that you talked to your friend, and you shouldn't have had to, I agree. Like from the moment it happened, there was something wrong. That balance was upset already, and the relationship had a fissure the moment he quoted your pastor. Right. I mean, that would create a fissure in a relationship, any relationship. And we did say that what would have been the right thing would have been simply acknowledging your experience in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think I wanted to repeat that. I think it's really important for people of all diverse backgrounds to understand that acknowledgement is what we seek.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you a story, and then you're going to tell me one that is exactly like it, because I know you've had it. I was, when I worked for the city, I was invited by the Unitarian Universalist Church to come and speak about being Jewish in Helena, what that was like. And of course, I get some ridiculous questions, right? Like the same thing. If you're ignorant, that has nothing to do with me. Like, you could have Googled Jewish head covering to know what a kippah was and what it signified. But some of those ridiculous questions, I don't mind. I have no problem answering those. I try to chuckle about it. Like, well, you could have Googled that, just to give them a heads up. But anyway,
Absolutely.
I was talking to a colleague who happens to be an HR professional. And I was telling him that I was looking forward to this Sunday, this is Friday, when I get to go and speak about being Jewish in Helena to this group of Unitarian Universalists, all white. Helena is pretty much all white. There are very few people of color here in this town. And he kind of looked at me puzzled. He said, why? I said, what do you mean why? He said, why does it even matter? And what he was referring to is, why does a Jewish person have to be different? Like, why would you need to do that? I guess I'm just giving him the benefit of the doubt that that's where that was coming from.
Absolutely.
But I said to him, what do you mean, why? They're curious about my experience of being Jewish in a place that has very few Jews.
Yes.
They're curious. They want to learn my perspective because it's so different from their own. They want to understand something that they haven't experienced. And I kind of looked at him and I did the whole head tilt. Do you understand what I'm saying here? I called him my friend the Neanderthal after that. And he really didn't get it. He just didn't get it. And to me, that's the whole thing, is that curiosity, approaching it with curiosity and love. So I'm guessing that you've had people say things like that to you, like, why does it matter? Like the whole, oh my gosh, the colorblind thing makes me crazy.
It drives me when. So COVID has been an amazing thing. So I'd say that COVID and the George Floyd moment, it was very cleansing in many ways, because you had time to process your friendship circle, in my case, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I was amazed by the number of people that I was surrounded by who all claimed that they were colorblind. Like, I don't see color. I don't see color. To me, you're not a black man. You're my friend, Jason. And when I was younger, I took that because, when you're young, and I'm saying like 10, 11 years old, you just want to fit in. Right.
You want to be just like everyone else.
Right. But then you have all these experiences in my particular case, as well as in your case. You have all these experiences that have been defined by a multitude of things, but your ethnicity being one of them. Right.
Right.
And in so many ways, it's been very impactful. So it angers me now when people say, I don't see your skin, I see you. But if you didn't know me and I happen to walk past you, and I'm 6'3", 270 pounds, former outside linebacker, and I still carry that size. If I were to walk past you and it was dark outside, would you say hello to me? Or would you put your head down, or would you cross the street? You don't know.
Or would you do the clutch from your book?
Or would
you grab their purse?
Yes, that just happened to me. That just happened to me again on Saturday. But I have a ton of respect for, and I'm sorry for the position you found yourself in, where it's like you have to answer for all Jewish people. But I'm going to say on the other side, I have respect for people who are at least willing to begin to have that dialogue, right? As opposed to your friend, the Neanderthal, and, many of my former friends who are like, why do we need to talk about racism? It doesn't matter to me. But then you probe them and you find how racist so many of their comments are, and they're not even aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a place that I found myself in now is when the George Floyd moment happened, I was amazed by the number of my friends who happen to be white who were so clueless as to what to ask or even what to say.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And for probably about 30 minutes, my wife and I felt responsible to provide them with all the answers, only to realize,
Here, let me comfort you.
Yeah, only to realize in minute 31, look, many of our friends are captains of industry. They're the kings and queens of their respective line of work. So if you could figure out all of the technicalities involved with being who you need to be as a professional, why can't you figure out the technicalities of what it means to be a human being looking at other human beings, right? Mm-hmm. I'm willing to be a guide, but just as we said in the book, I'm not the king of all Black people.
Oh, I loved that line. I love that line because when I was answering questions at a college class, a comparative religion course about being Jewish, and particularly a non-religious Jew, I'm more of a secular Jew, but
sure.
Anyway, it's a long story how that delineates. But one of the things that I had to explain to them was that there's no Jewish pope. There's no one Jewish rabbi that tells all of us what to believe. So when you ask, do Jews believe this or do Jews believe that? I can tell you what I believe.
Right.
But I'm not the queen of all Jewish people. You're not the king of all Black people.
Exactly.
I love that line.
But to add to this, and it's something else we talked about in the book, was I feel, and I guarantee you that my experiences are no different than the experiences of any marginalized group of people. I feel that when I'm a consultant, I'm in and out of companies all year round. Some of the people that I deal with, the decision makers know that I'm African American. The people that will be reporting to me in some form or fashion have no idea I'm African American. To some, it doesn't matter. To others, it's, wait a minute, right? Who is this guy? Where do we get this guy from? Especially the fact that he's the only person of color in the entire room. But I feel such a strong responsibility, not only for my performance, but I have to make sure that I do everything absolutely correctly, because I cannot afford, if I have a bad day, that's not just reflected upon their impression of me. It's reflected upon their potential impression of anyone of color who might potentially walk through the door one day.
Exactly.
Right?
Who's going to follow you?
Who's going to follow me? Because if it's almost like you're carrying this torch, but you don't know who you're carrying it for. And more importantly, you don't know, why it's important, but that sense of responsibility never wanes. And one of the things that we hear from in my work, that I hear from so many diverse employees, so many diverse managers, so many diverse executives, is the pressure that not only comes with doing the job, but also they're dealing with the perceptions of the people that people might have about people of color, people who are Jewish, people who are members of the LGBT plus community, right? I mean, it's so much weight to carry. And it's just a lot of weight.
It is. And I think I think the only answer to that is to continue to encourage people to see individuals as individuals.
Yes.
I mean, each opportunity we have to remind people that each interaction that you have is new. Doesn't matter who it is, it's all new, and approaching it with curiosity. I think what I really appreciate when I'm talking to somebody that is unfamiliar, somebody who has had very significantly different experiences from me, is that I can ask them questions. And it's not that, but when I ask a question, and this is what I'd encourage our listeners to do, ask a question as an individual. How do you feel when this happened? Is there something that I can do to provide support to you? I'm not going to ask you what all Black people think. I might ask you, well, as an African American, what is your position on but only if we're in the context of that kind of conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I was watching The Shop. It's a LeBron James show on HBO.
Uh-huh.
And I love it. It's a lot of fun. It's a revolving door of, movie stars, athletes, personalities. And Kevin Hart was on there. Kevin Hart, the comedian, was on there with Lil Nas X, the rapper who came out as gay.
Right.
And, especially within the African-American community, which is always so weird to me, because we should be the community that accepts everybody. Right.
Right. Well, I feel the same about Jews. I'm like, we've been so the outsiders for so many. Why would we not support all the people that are different?
Oh my gosh, because that's my thing. How can Black people be homophobic? I'll never understand it, because we're sitting there fighting for equal rights on this side, but trying to deny equal rights on this side. It makes no sense.
I know.
But as Lil Nas X started to talk about his experiences and the fact that he's gay, and he's gay within the world of hip hop, which is uber masculine, right?
Right.
You have Kevin Hart, who's had his own share of issues with the gay community. And he looks at Lil Nas X, which should have been a wonderful opportunity to engage in dialogue that we all could have benefited from.
Right.
He looks at Lil Nas X and goes, why does it matter? So you're gay. So what? Why does it matter? And you see Lil Nas X really doing his best to remain steady. And I was very impressed by that young man. But I was so angry because that's what happens so often. Is that when we have an opportunity to really hear someone's perspective, right? A perspective that might open up other lines of dialogue, people want to shut it down. And when people throw out, you're gay, so what? You're Black, so what? You're Jewish, so what? Black lives matter? No, all lives matter. What you're really saying is, I'm not comfortable in this space. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to use my heteronormative, right? Superiority, perceived superiority, and I'm going to shut you down, because the more you talk, the more uncomfortable it makes me. Mm. And that, to me, I love doing diversity training. We do a ton of diversity training, but sometimes I just want to tell people, you know what? Forget about the PowerPoints. Let's get in a circle, and I'm going to throw out some things to you. And I want you to just share the first thing that comes to your mind. And here's the thing. I'm not going to judge you for it. Because if we could create this vulnerable space by which you can open up, and if you sound like an idiot, I'd much rather you sound like an idiot today, because you're going to learn something so you don't sound like an idiot tomorrow.
Right. You're going to be able to look in the mirror and understand that you're not a villain.
You have to fail fast. I mean, we're so concerned about saying the right thing that we refuse to say anything. In the process of saying absolutely nothing, you fail to grow. Mm-hmm. Right?
I think the saddest part about Kevin Hart not saying something like, well, what's been your experience with that? Or,
yes,
are you okay? Like, is there something that I could do to support you?
Yes.
I'm not sure, or even I'm not sure what to say here, but know that I hear you.
Yes. And that would have been everything.
Yeah. And the sad thing, though, is that I'm not convinced that every person that shuts it down like that is doing it out of a superiority. Sure. I don't want to hear what you have to say thing. It is a discomfort for sure.
Yes.
And in that case, Kevin Hart is probably not super comfortable with his own masculinity, Amen. His own gender identity. He's not super comfortable in his skin. And so that does make him uncomfortable, but not necessarily in a superiority way. And I only say that because I remember when I was a sophomore, junior in college, and my cousin came out to me, and I said, okay, thanks for sharing, because I was grateful that he shared. I also didn't want him to think that I was going to change anything, that his coming out to me was going to change my love for him or our relationship in any way. So that's how I reacted. I was 20 years old. What do you know at 20?
Sure.
But at this point, I know I would react differently. I know I would say, okay, what else do you want to share with me? Mm-hmm. Can you share an experience that was painful, or are you excited to be coming out? Does it feel good to be comfortable in your skin?
Yes.
What can I do with this? So I would just really encourage our listeners during this conversation, as you're hearing our conversation, to think about what you would do in these scenarios, because we have to practice this. We're going to freeze. We're going to say the wrong thing.
Yes.
But if you're listening to this conversation and you're understanding maybe the next time this happens, you're going to have to recognize these microaggressions so that your people of color around you don't have to tell you that they're happening. You're going to have to start to recognize them. I was just talking about that with a friend that somebody said, "Oh, you look good for 50" to me. And it wasn't intentional. The guy didn't mean to insult me, right? But I thought, why did you have to qualify that? You look good for 50. That's a microaggression. When somebody says, "Wow, you're pretty good at math," and they're looking at you and the butt doesn't come out, but you know they mean for a girl, or "You're pretty good at throwing that stick for your dog," for a girl.
Right.
I mean, those are microaggressions. And if we don't recognize it when they're happening toward our friends, the people around us, then we can't acknowledge it with them. We can't be there in their space. And
Very
be
well
the
stated.
people that we want to be.
Very well stated.
Okay. If there was anything else that you could share with an audience of people who are curious and truly want to be able to see a future where these conversations can be more comfortable and can happen, and our communities can be more loving, what would that be?
Be willing to start with hello.
Hello.
And hello. And when I say that, you'd be amazed at the number of people who look different, who may look and act differently than you do, who have so many of the same concerns that you have. We all want a better world for our kids. We all wonder, did I do a good job today in the presentation? How am I going to pay the mortgage? Am I doing enough? Am I being enough? Am I saying it enough? Whatever insecurities that come with being human, you'll find that we're really no different. We just want you to say hello to us and acknowledge us. And for every one hi you get, you might get 3 people who walk past you. But have some compassion for them because they're not used to being seen by you. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes,
or they're shy.
or they're shy, or they're dealing with their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Start with a hello, and you'd be amazed at the number of conversations you're going to have and the amount of things that you'll learn by just simply opening up to other people.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Thank you.
No, thank you. This was awesome. I do a lot of podcasts. This is one of the best I've done. So thank you. You create such an intentional space, and thank you for that.
Thank you. So for our listeners, there will be links to Jason's website and to purchase his book on the blog post associated with this podcast. And I may link to a couple of other resources that Jason may recommend to continue this discussion. And I really strongly encourage you to connect with Jason on LinkedIn and follow him. I will have links in the blog post associated with the podcast for you to be able to connect with him there. Thank you, Jason. It's been my pleasure.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. You're awesome. I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. The book of the same title is now available, and the audiobook version will be released in November 2020. If you're ready to uncover your stories and learn to uncover the stories of the people around you to create stronger connections and healthier communities, visit elkinsconsulting.com. And while you're visiting the website, you can learn more about the book and the work we do to improve communication among teams and through our one-to-one coaching. Thank you.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell?